This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the podcast and are not intended to malign any religion, group, club, organization, business, individual, anyone, or anything.
I'm Sarah Edmondson.
And I'm Anthony, air quotes nippy, Ames.
And this is A Little Bit Culty, a podcast about what happens when things that seem like a great thing at first go bad.
Every week, we chat with survivors, experts, and whistleblowers for real cult stories told directly by the people who lived through them.
Because we want you to learn a few things we've had to learn the hard way.
Like, if you think you're too smart to get sucked into something culty, you're already prime recruitment material.
You might even already be in a cult.
Oops. You better keep listening to find out.
Welcome to Season 6 of A Little Bit Culty. Hey everyone, here's our conversation with Cameron Black, a Stanford University student who's overcome challenges many of us cannot even fathom. Welcome to this episode of A Little Bit Culty.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We appreciate that you woke up at 7 a.m. PST to do this. And I trust that you have been through so much in your life that this is easy for you now.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm an early riser anyway, so I like that.
How are you doing? You have been through a lot. Are you doing okay these days?
These days I'm doing pretty good. I mean, every once in a while it catches back up with me, but I've got the resources and support now to know what to do with it, when to do with it. So it gets easier as time goes on.
That's good. You are in California. You're studying at Stanford.
Yes.
Are you undergrad at Stanford?
I am an undergrad. So this is technically my senior year. I'm not a normal student. I'm what they call a transfer student.
What does that mean?
It just means that I spent some time at another university, and most of the time that's a city college or community college. I spent 2 years at Santa Barbara City College before transferring to Stanford. It just puts you in a completely different pool of students.
Yeah. Got it.
Right.
Well, let's go back to the beginning of time for Cameron. One of the things that I was interested about your story when you first reached out over Instagram, yay for Instagram, and told us about your story, is that we'd talked about on A Little Bit Culty different structures of cults, one of them being Cult of One and the family cult, which we still haven't done much on and we plan on. And yours is one that's also not super documented. There's no documentary, there's no case study in a book. So we weren't able to research and know more, but other than what you could share with us. But that's, I believe, where your story starts. And I do find it fascinating that the same structures in a cult with a cult leader can exist within a family. So without, re-traumatizing you and having you go through all the details, please share with our audience a little bit about what life was like in your family and how your dad, Aegean, was that his
That's
name
what he
gave
called himself. And actually the name he ultimately legally changed to.
What does that mean, Aegean?
I have 3 siblings. I'm one of 4. And together we all pretty much remember most of it. I don't remember where that name came from, though. I think it was just the name when he decided, or I guess he never decided. If you're God, you're just God, right?
Right.
The Aegean Sea, I'm sure it's something
But
to
he
do with
didn't
it.
spell it like the Aegean Sea. He spelled it Agean. So I think it was just a name that spoke to him as the godly, omnipotent figure that he believed he was.
And how did that play out in your life?
So growing up, it wasn't always bad, although the mind likes to go there and likes to remember all of the pretty horrible shit. It's not all bad. When we were really young, there was a lot of love, actually, mostly for my father. We weren't actually allowed to bond with our mothers. We weren't allowed to breastfeed. we weren't allowed to call our mother's mom. That was pretty much the first red flag. I mean, not for me, at 2, obviously, or however
Yeah,
old
you didn't. You're like, red flag. I cannot form a proper attachment.
Yeah. But looking back now, I think that was probably the first stage of many in terms of that cults being a cult. Like, what are the flags,
Right.
in the family?
The indoctrination. So like not forming proper attachment. And also, I think you've shared that you were isolated from the outside world. You didn't go to school. It's very insular.
Yeah.
Right? Like you were.
It was very interesting, actually, because we were isolated, but not so isolated. So we didn't go to school as kids. We were homeschooled for the first stretch of our lives. I think we were homeschooled for the first 13 years of my life. And then we'll go into that later.
Mhm.
But the homeschooling curriculum, looking back on it, wasn't bad. It just wasn't consistent. But then there were other things that we were allowed to do. Like we could go out as kids, we could go out for hours and just romp around the wilderness alone when we were like 5, 6, 7. We would go, we were mountain biking on trails. I mean, this is Sedona, Arizona. Like we were mountain biking on trails when we were 7 and 8, like adults, on our own. So there were these things, but in our minds, we knew we were never to talk to people and we were never to share about our lives with people. It was unspoken. Never did a Gian. I'm going to call him Brad because that was his name that he was born with. And I prefer to do that.
Of course.
Never
Brad.
Did he ever say anything like that? But we knew that should it ever get back to him, we might die. So, yeah.
And he punished you, correct? If you didn't brush your teeth properly or stepped out of line or questioned.
Yeah.
Got strict punishment, physical?
There was a lot of physical abuse, and each person experienced varying amounts of it in the cult. We all had there was a hierarchy for sure in this place, and among the siblings and among the adults. And I was the runt, if you will. I bore the brunt of the physical abuse. My sisters bore the sexual abuse and physical abuse for sure. My brother was the favorite, if you will, the one that my father favored, let him do most things, have the most freedom, and suffered physical abuse, but definitely nowhere near to what I experienced or what my sisters experienced. I used to tell myself he was lucky, but looking back on it, I could never do what he did, my older brother. I could never watch other people get that's a total other abuse in and of itself, right?
Right.
Having to see it, not experience it.
And you mentioned also mothers. So were your siblings your half siblings, and then the other mothers were part of the commune?
Yeah, so it's kind of a cluster, but I am half siblings with most of my siblings except for my older brother, but we share a sister. So my younger sister and I share the same father but a different mother, and then they share a mother.
I've lost you, but I get the idea.
It's easy to get lost. Yes.
Yeah. So this went on for 13 years. Physical, emotional, sexual abuse, isolation, believing that he's God. And one of the things that stuck out in your TEDx talk, which we'll get to, is that you thanked him for these beatings because you believed, as you would trust your parents, your dad.
No? This is very interesting and something I still don't really get to this day.
Okay.
My siblings and I never bought his shit, ever. Now, I don't know about all of them, but I know for me personally, I'll just speak for me because I'll let them speak for themselves whenever they do.
Yeah.
I never believed it. I don't know why. I don't know what pushed me to challenge it, but I never believed the words that came out of his mouth, the slew of his jargon.
Like, what was his main, other than believing that he's God, what was his main mission? Like, what did he believe?
Yeah. And to be honest, it changed over time and it wasn't always coherent. And I think, he was sick, like sociopathic tendencies. And it definitely appeared like that.
Did you have those thoughts that he was sick?
No, I didn't
time?
have I didn't have the, I don't know, knowledge or wherewithal for that to even be an option. I just
You knew he was off, though, right?
I knew something was wrong. I knew life shouldn't be this painful. To answer your question, Sarah, he called this place the Matrix. Very original. He claimed that he was God and we were all his children, which didn't really make sense with all the sex and shit going on there, but I guess, okay. And that he was here to save us all if we accepted that he was God. Gee, very original. And there's so much like little things that I could tell you about this, but they wouldn't make any sense in any context. I would say that it was a bunch of sci-fi novels, some of the Bible, and a cuckoo man all sloshed together into a doctrine. So I think one of the reasons my father was so hard on me was because I scared him. Even from a young age, as a young child, I was a happy kid and I talked to people. I was such a people person. Like the maintenance guy would come over and I would be elated and I would just talk and have fun. Like it was so easy for me. And I think when I was young, I was such a light in that scared him. And I think he had to do, I think it put him in jeopardy, actually. I think it was a threat. I was a threat to all that he was. And so he tried as hard as he could to snuff that, to beat that out of me. And it didn't work.
And then he took his life when you were 13.
Yeah, when I was 13. Before that, we were actually, my mother, my older sister, and I were kicked out of the cult. We were booted. He said, you can have the car and some amount of money if you sign this and like NDA or what. I don't remember what it actually was. I assume it was some sort of NDA. But he said, you can have the car and this little amount of money if you never say anything. So she signed it. We left. And that was in July of 2013, I believe. And then my little sister and older brother, both who've given me permission to use their names. So my little sister's name is Killian. My older brother's name is Forrest. And both of them were still living in the commune at the time. So with their mother. So in November 17th, 2013, I was sat down and told that Gian killed himself, is what my mother told me. She sat me down with who I thought was my father at the time. Actually, Brad didn't claim any of us. He said that Killian, Forrest, and I were this other gentleman who was in the cult until I was 8. We were his kids. And my older sister was, I don't know, some guy who was in the cult before we were even born as kids.
Wait, hold on 1 second. So this whole time when you've been talking about like your dad as a GN,
Yes.
Beating you and running the cult, you didn't actually think he was your dad.
Mm-mm. I mean, I had an idea. Oh. I will say I didn't fully believe that we weren't his kids because there was sex and sex abuse and like incest. And it was very rampant in the cult. I mean, my father would walk around naked. He would openly have sex in rooms all around the house, and he openly talk about it and openly have sexual interactions with my sisters in spaces that just like on this computer and I can like they're seared into my brain. So sex was so warped for us as kids.
Wow.
And so distorted. And he even used sex in his model of the world, his doctrine. And anyway, it was just so warped. And I wanted to sort of come back to that because it's definitely one of the things that was the hardest, and I'm still working on it, one of the hardest things to undo, to untangle.
I can only imagine that would be very confusing for a child and even teenager or young adults to not understand safe, proper boundaries. And I mean, we're not therapists, but we know that that's obviously a lot to deal with.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry that you went through that. I can't. And so still blown away that you're even talking about it at the age of 23.
Yeah, me too, by
But
the
we'll
way.
get to yeah, we'll get to that. Thank you for sharing that, for clarifying. Okay, so you find out this man who you thought was a Aegean is actually your dad, and he's dead.
No. So I found out that he
Okay.
was dead first, actually.
Okay.
So at this point, I had been, when I got kicked out of the cult, actually, while I was still in the cult, my older sister, so I got to back up just a little bit here because the grandparents came in and they sued for visitation rights. This is all going to be very loosey-goosey, and I'm not going to say details, but it's roughly the case, okay? So the grandparents came in 2011, and they were like, hey, we're suing for visitation rights. So I was 11 at the time. And they said, okay, like, call the grandparents, tell them they can come see their kids, as Brad said. So they did. They visited us for like 2 years on and off, 2011 to 2013. And then finally, my older sister was the first to leave. Grandpa offered for her to go on a vacation to Chile because his fourth wife is Chilean. And she said, yeah, let me think about it, because obviously she had to get permission from Brad. And Brad had this way of manipulation that was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was so mind-blowing and scary. And he'd make you decide that it was the wrong thing to do without saying, he could say almost nothing.
I can picture that.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, he tried to do that to her as hard as he could, and my older sister persevered, and she went on that vacation. And I knew when she left, she wasn't coming back. And that was really hard for me because she was my only buffer. She was the only thing that was keeping him from killing me for so long. So that was hard.
Because she'd protected you.
She did her best. She was just another person for him to abuse, and she would try to be that person. Anyway, so I knew she wasn't coming back, and I knew something had to change or I was going to die probably. So I asked Brad, I said, hey, she's off on vacation. Can I go to public school? I don't know why. I'd always wanted to go to public school. So I asked him, and I think he said he'd think about it, which was insane. Like, he'd think about it? Whoa. So he ended up saying yes. I don't remember exactly how this went down, but he ended up saying yes. And I was enrolled in public school while I was in the cult, coming home to that every day, getting the shit beat out of me. And that was my life.
Did the teachers not see that you were been beaten up?
It wasn't hard to tell, to be fair, but nobody said anything. 8th grade was hard for me. I had never been to school and I had no social cues. I was a kid that wanted so badly for everybody to love me that I didn't do myself any favors, Middle schoolers are fucking evil anyway. They're brutal, man.
Brutal, yeah.
And this is before you got booted out?
This is all before we got booted out.
Okay. And I forgot to ask, why'd you get booted out? Is something your mom did or something you did?
So neither. I think we were I don't know the exact reason per se, but I think that he was more at risk with us there, especially because I was in school already. And I think that CPS, there was already an investigation going on at this point. Like, things were going downhill and they were going downhill fast. So I just want to note that I'm on purpose not speaking to the specifics of the abuse that went on in the cult, just because I don't know that it's fully necessary. In my TED Talk, I talk a little bit more about it. It can be jarring, but it was life-threatening. Let's put it that way.
Right.
So, okay, I'm in 8th grade. By the way, I was telling people. I was not a kid that was quiet. I was telling people what was going on at home. And I think there was a mix of people not believing me and people just not knowing what the fuck to do with that. Like, the things if you tell someone that you go home, you went home and your dad put your hand in a blender and turned it on, especially a kid, what do you do with that, And so it actually makes sense to me. The teachers, not so much. The nurse, not so much.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you said, so he was doing this for 13 years. Actually, that had been going on when it ended for 22 years. The
So
kids were born.
he'd had this going for
Mhm.
22 years total.
Yeah, the kids
Wow.
were born about halfway through, I think.
And this is all in Sedona?
No. So it actually started in, I believe, Santa Cruz or Agoura Hills or something like that.
And then moved to Sedona.
And then in like the very beginnings, they moved to Sedona like 3 years in or something like that.
So much crazy shit happens in Sedona. We've had 3 or 4 podcasts where bad shit happens. And I love Sedona.
This podcast wouldn't happen without our amazing, supportive, generous patrons. Are you with us? Come find us over on Patreon at patreon.com/alittlebitculty for bonus episodes, exclusive content, and the occasional Zoom with our fan favorites from our past episodes. It's a lot of fun over there, people.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one. Okay, so back to your story. You get booted out. Did you say why? No, you didn't say why.
I think I think we put him at risk.
Put him at risk. Sorry, you did say why.
I imagine you're going to find out stuff still in the future about that.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I'm actually in contact with my biological mother, and I'm also in contact with my little sister and older brother's biological mother. So I hear tidbits about things and I share tidbits about things. A lot of the things that happened to me, a lot of the people in the cult didn't know about. My siblings didn't know. Like a lot of these, there were big events where I was almost killed that nobody knew. And I didn't realize how good Brad was at keeping things to himself and making sure that I never said anything. It was really, he was tactful.
So that's another little seed I want to plant, because I know the rest of your story is that keeping secrets and keeping things hidden was trained in you from a young age.
Yeah, I was a good liar.
Yeah, which is something we talk a lot about on this podcast is, especially with teaching children from not abusive homes, but going into different situations. Like if any teacher or coach or uncle or whatever says, keep this between us, or this is just a secret. Like we're trying to do that with our kids as well. Like really teach them that lesson of there's no place for secrets. Anyone tells you to keep this a secret, you tell us immediately. But you can't have that in your situation because this is your authority figure.
Yeah, there's no outside intervention.
No outside. Yeah, it was too late for you in that way. Okay, so we have a lot to cover, and I just want to make sure we get to what you're doing now.
Yeah.
Tell me if this is accurate. You find out he's dead, then you find out he's your father,
Yes.
and then social services or your family steps in.
I found that he's my father while I was in 8th grade, and then things happened. I got into heavy drugs and hang out with the wrong people, and I was shipped off to a Jesuit boarding school. I stayed with my grandparents for a few weeks, and then they put me in this boarding school in California.
This is the same grandparents that took your older sister to Chile.
Yes.
They're just trying to help you out here.
Exactly. And they have been there since day one, right? Like they just want, like, how do you help someone like me?
Right.
So they did their best and they got me into this boarding school. They had to pull big strings to do it, apparently. I didn't know this at the time, but it was like a really hard one to get your kid into kind of thing. So they got me in and I spent a year there. And this boarding school turned out to be horrible. And I was abused by my peers and sexually abused by my psychologist. that was assigned to work with me for the year that I was there. Anyway, went off to this boarding school for a year, more abuse physically from my peers, sexual abuse, which I hadn't experienced in the cult really, not that directly. I mean, indirect abuse, obviously, just via exposure and sibling, like watching siblings, all of that stuff. But I'd never experienced it on the first hand until then. So after a year at this boarding school, I got kicked out because I was taking what I was learning from my psychologist in the therapy room to the dorm, and I was hypersexual with all the boys, self-harm, self-suicidal ideation. I got kicked out of that school, and they said, it's his fault. We just can't handle him. He's a risk kid.
And did you tell anybody about the counselor at the time or no?
When they called me on the phone in 2019 and said, hey, this guy's been arrested. I know you aren't his caseload. Did anything happen? I said, no, nothing. I refuse to say anything. So surprising, So I didn't say anything when they asked me, dead straight.
Wow.
And I was scared, to be honest. I was scared that I was going to get in trouble. That was my first thought when they called me. I was scared I was just scared.
And as we talk about later, a shame that you'd done something wrong.
Yeah, that was so present for me for so long. And it was always in the background. Anytime something came up, it didn't have to have anything to do with that. That would come up for me. This shame, this lurking gut wrenching. Anyway, moving right along. I got kicked out of that school and they put me in what they call an RTC. It's a residential treatment center for youth with behavioral and psychological challenges. So they put me in an RTC. Actually, they put me in like a wilderness program RTC. And then, long story short, I got kicked out of, from there, 7 or 8 RTCs in the course of 3 years. So I was at that one boarding school from 14 to 15. And then from 15 to 18, I got kicked out of 7 other schools. Always something new. My turnaround rate was quick. 3 months, 2 weeks, whatever it was.
And none of the psychologists at any of these treatment centers were able to see what was going on with you and get to it? How did you slip through the cracks here?
Part of it was because I didn't want help. I'll start with that. I didn't think I was worth the help, is one thing. And I didn't see myself as anything other than a fuck up. And I thought, well, I might as well live up to the expectation, And as a kid, one of the things and why I am in such a position to make a difference in this area is with kids in these treatment centers, especially with me, I already thought I was a fuck up. It's what I've been told my whole life. It was the narrative that was ingrained in my head. And then finally, people come into your life, and there were some sweet people at most of these treatment centers. There were people who really wanted to care for me, and they could see that I was hurting. They would say, Cameron, we love you. We want to help you. And I'd say, okay, bet. You want to help me? Let's see how far I could push you. And I'd push and I'd push and I'd push until finally they'd break and they'd say, fuck it. I can't do this anymore. And they'd walk. I literally caused people to walk from their jobs working with these kids. And that's how that works. You push until people say, fuck it, I'm leaving. And then you say, I told you so. And that's the attachment disorder at its finest, right? And it wasn't unique to me. It really wasn't. So there were people that cared. I was just really good at pushing them away.
Right.
Yeah. Therapist, I think I had this background for psychologist bad because, not bad, but just I had an association with psychologists and shame in my head because of the psychologist in the first boarding school. And so it was really hard for me to want to get into therapy. I did much better with female therapists though. And then I got comfortable more later on. So anyway, I aged out of these programs though. At 18.
Is that how you eventually got out, or was there something that pulled you out?
No. So you were talking about my uncle.
Yeah. Yes.
My uncle I now call him Dad. So him and his partner are my chosen parents. It's a great thing about having fucked up parents. You get to choose new ones. So I did. And they are the most amazing people I will ever have the pleasure of being in the presence of. They are the reason I am where I am today, without a doubt in my mind. So very grateful for them and all they've done for me. The love, the commitment, and the knots walking on me.
But they pulled you out?
So they didn't pull me out. No. So at
No.
18, I aged out of these treatment centers for youth. They couldn't legally keep me anymore. So we like scrambled to find another thing for me. So I ended up finding this transition home in Idaho where it was like, hey, you are been in RTCs your whole childhood life. Like, here's a transition place to get you into the real world. My uncle, I was going to say dad because that's my go-to. I'll just say my dad and you'll know what I mean. I'll say my father for Brad. So
wait, no, I'm going to get confused. Can you say my new dad?
My new dad.
Okay?
I can say my new dad.
Okay.
I love that. My new dad.
Okay.
So my new dad is the one who was not the whole time I was in treatment centers, but basically from 16 on, he was doing therapy like on Zoom with me before that was like in vogue. He was doing that. Like, so we had joint sessions like multiple times a week. And I got really close to him over the years because he was so in the goo with me. He was so in the work with me. That's how we created our relationship. That's how it sort of strengthened, I would say. So when it was all said and done and I was aging out, he was like, okay, great. He met up with me at the last treatment center I was at, and he drove me to this new place. So this was all him and my other uncle and my grandparents getting together saying, hey, this is what we think is best. And that's what it was for years.
It's amazing that they stuck through, because you said you pushed so many people away, but these
I tried.
Family members.
I tried hard for them too, I will say. And I knew, to be honest, I wanted so badly to do well, but I was so volatile. I was such a ball of anger and shame and frustration and trauma. Like, they tried medication on so many levels, and it was just so hard to control. Every time I go into a new placement when I was in treatment centers, I would think to myself, I'm going to be good here. I would say, I'm going to be the quiet kid. I'm just going to relax. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to just take it in and be good. And it never happened, but I knew I wanted it. I really did.
So what needed to shift? What changed for you that you embarked on your actual healing journey, not like a trying to healing journey? Like, what was it, what your family said, your new chosen family said to you when they welcomed you?
So at 20 years old, I was in a really bad spot, and my chosen family, so my new dad and his partner, were like, hey, they actually prefaced the whole thing with a commitment for growth, to be honest. They were like, we so want you. We so want to be with you and to help you grow. And we want what you want for you, is what they would tell me from the very beginning. And from the very beginning, it was a commitment to being better, though. They're like, we're a house like where we just don't smoke cigarettes. We don't do drugs. And if you're committed to that, like, we'd love to have you. I think the biggest thing for me was from the very beginning, they said this, I want what you want for you. And so there wasn't an expectation. There wasn't a specific thing that I get done and that they be happy about so that I could stay. It was, create your life. Like, we want to help you create the life you want. We want to help you thrive in any way you want. And if that's flipping burgers, like, totally, let's do it. And they were so happy. Anything that I wanted. So when I moved in with them with a lot of encouragement, I got my GED at 20 and I passed the top percentile. And then I was like, whoa, that was huge for me. It was on the list of things I never thought I'd do in my life, graduate high school to get my GED. And then I was like, okay, great. Maybe I get like a part-time job. And my soul mama, that's what I call his partner, Kate. She is just the most fantastic being on the planet. She was like, well, what about college? And I was like, yeah, right. And she's like, no, seriously, like, it's free if you do. So Santa Barbara City College has a promise program where it's free for 2 years if you get your GED in the area. So I did that, signed up, got a free ride for 2 years. And I was like, whoa. And you got to understand that up until this point, I thought I was stupid. Like my nickname as a kid was worthless piece of shit. Like that was what my father called. That's what my father called me. And so I really didn't think I was intelligent. So I started my first semester in City College, and my soul mama, I have a very advantageous connection with my soul mama because she was a professor in college. And so she was really, really helpful. Integral in how do you write a paper? How do you, like, when teachers ask for this, like, what are they asking for? Like, she was so the right person in the right space to be
That's
helping
amazing.
me walk through this. It really was. I don't really know how to fully have you guys get how extraordinary my soul mama and my new dad are. But they're not just extraordinary for doing what they've done for me in all the ways that they've done it, but they're extraordinary for the ways in which they've done it are the extraordinary part.
I can feel it.
Yeah. I'm blessed for sure.
I'm so happy that you had that, and please thank them for me. They don't know me. Maybe you'll share this interview with them.
And now, a brief message from our Little Bit Culty sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Break time's over, people. Let's get back to this episode of A Little Bit Culty. It's a good one.
I mean, you're so articulate for somebody who's just emerged from this. And Nippy and I were commenting earlier about, like, just quite how astounding that is. Like, for A, your age, and B, how much trauma you endured. I'm sure people listening will be A, concerned, but also like, are you okay? Like, what's your therapy journey been like, given that you had so many like abusive people, people in positions of power who are actually abusive?
Well, there's never an extended period of time for you to get any roots in any sort of routine. So, like
up until I moved in with my soul parents.
Yes. So that's been 3 years?
Yeah. 3 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's like incredible that seem so grounded and also, wanting to talk about it and share your story and help others. How much has that played into your healing journey in terms of helping others?
Such a big part. For a long time, I couldn't get better because I wanted to get better for me. I had to get better for other people. And that's played a huge part in my journey, actually. When you think you're not worth it, it's so hard to do things for yourself, for you. So for the first stretch of living with my soul parents, I really had to lean on I had to see me through their eyes because I couldn't do it through mine. So to answer your question, there is a mix of miraculousness. Sometimes there is no answer to the things that I'm able to do, the intelligence that I possess in terms of being able to be an almost straight A student at Stanford. And I don't get that. I don't know if there's an explanation for this. Some part of me thinks it shouldn't be possible. But I have worked so hard to be here and to heal and to be in a place where not only am I healing on my own, but I'm able to help others heal. I have worked so hard for that, and I've had a lot of love and support. I've been doing therapy constantly since I moved in with them. When I moved in with them, I got a therapist. My new dad and I were doing joint sessions. Like, this was a multifaceted journey. I was a full-time student and a full-time like therapy. What's the word for that? Patient. Thank you.
Patient, yeah. It reminds me of something that Dan Shaw said in our season 1 about what helped him with getting out. I think he was talking about just having a job that was consistent. Like sometimes just having some, I'm sure the school structure in and of itself even though it's not therapy, but having that consistency, like Nippy said, like you weren't consistent anywhere, but having something that you, like a structure that you stuck to that was like based in reality. What is that?
Cathartic, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I have learned this. I spent the summer in Alaska working with Native youth in villages in Alaska. And like over time, as I've been working with kids in these last years, and in my own experience, kids with trauma thrive on consistency, period. When in Alaska, when kids would do things like I got punched by a kid, I reacted the same way when I got punched as when I was having a conversation with that kid at lunch. And that kid like connected with me for that I didn't react. I didn't make it big. They thrive on consistency in the way you show up and in their doing. And I think that is a big part of what my soul mama and my new dad have brought to my life. And just so you know, it's not just therapy that I was doing. I mean, they were such a yes for me. This cool workshop, like nonviolent communication workshop, that sounds cool. Okay, great, do it.
Yeah. How did the TEDx talk come about?
Oh, gosh. So one of the things I'll share with you about my life and what I found has worked so well, and part of why I'm here today, is I'm a yes. Even when I don't feel like being a yes, or even when I have hesitations, I'm a yes. And life's so much easier that way. There's so much more freedom in my life that way. Like, oh, there's this opportunity, and like often I'll be no, like in my head, but like, oh, well, maybe like yes. So that was one of the things I started doing in City College. I started taking leadership positions, like student government positions. I started leading clubs and a bunch of other like extracurricular. It was just like, yes, yes, yes. I was a yes to a bunch of personal development work. Like, yes, like it just happened that I had so many opportunities and I was just a yes for all of them. And that is partly how TED came about. The story about my TED Talk is actually kind of funny. So I've been talking about doing a TED Talk for 2 years. 2 out of the 3 years, I have been like contributing relatively normal member of society. I said, I'm going to do a TED Talk one day before I even got sober, I think. Right. And so it was a manifestation that I had been holding in my heart for a very long time. So I came to Stanford and I continued to manifest that. And then randomly, I decided to go to a different dining hall one day and I sat next to a random kid. I do that. I sit next to random people and start conversations because I like to meet people. I like to get a view into people's lives and have people feel heard. So he's like, dude, you should do a TED Talk. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was actually thinking about, I know Stanford's TEDx licensed. So I was thinking about starting that up. He's like, it's already started up. The application's due and it was Thursday. He said the application's due Sunday. And he sent me this email and it was like speakers. So I was like, no way. How wild is that? So he forwarded me the email and I did the application. It took me like a day. It was a pretty, extensive application to come up with on the fly.
Right.
So I turned it in. And then they're like, okay, great. We got your application set up for an interview slot. Did like the in-person interview, gave them like a teaser of my talk. And then they're like, okay, you were chosen as one of the speakers. That's it. I found out later that over 100 people sent in an application. 26 students got interviews and only 6 students were chosen as speakers. So
that's amazing.
Wow. Yeah.
That's a real feather in your cap. I don't know what your coaching process was like. I know for me, we had some teaching and some guidance. And one of the nuggets that was passed to me was in the writing process, which I've actually found harder than the speaking process, was like, what's the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their method, at least what was taught to me, is they want the listener to walk away with an idea from your story. Like, what's the nugget that they're taking away? How did you, with everything that you've gone through, well, I have an idea of what your nugget is, but I want to know what you think your idea is and see if I got the idea. And how did you come up with it? And were you trained that way also?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So my soul mama has been a public speaker. She is my teacher of all things, if we're being honest. She's just like one of those people that you're like, how are you good at everything? So she was my TEDx coach, and
amazing.
We had her and one of her friends who's amazing, his name's Tobin, help me craft this talk, because I had all the stuff, but I didn't really have, like, I'd never crafted a talk like this before. I'd crafted talks, but nothing like this. And so they really helped me with like holding the big picture while I like did the writing and then the editing, and then they would like shoot it back to me and be like, hey, what about this? It was a long process, and you're 100% correct. And like the writing is so much more of a task, of a challenge than the speaking. So I will say that a lot of me finding the nugget, as you said, was with their support, because I just had so much going on that it was hard for me to see it.
I had a similar experience, and I needed help writing.
It sounds like you finally got some parental guidance.
Absolutely. Oh man, my chosen parents are just the best. Yeah. So you asked what I thought my nugget was.
Yeah. Like, what's the idea that you want people to walk away from your TED Talk, which hopefully will be online. Mm-hmm. We'll try to let this episode come out around the same time. So what would you like them to walk away with?
It's a very good question, and something that I actually contemplated after the talk myself. The idea that I would like the viewers to walk away with is that I'd like them to understand the role that shame plays in intergenerational violence and abuse, especially in children. And to understand that they can make a difference, that no matter who you are or who the people in your life are, you can make a difference by coming into, like, allowing people to strip the shame of abuse, the shame of any of the abuse, and that people who are abused have synapses rewired. It's the rewiring that takes place. And oftentimes that leads to them having desires and urges to abuse. And that there's the shame and stigmatization of that dynamic right there. The shame and stigmatization of being an abuser or having those desires is what perpetuates cyclical abuse. And that if we as a society, that's you, that's me, that's anybody, could just take a breath and say, well, abuse is happening. We know that. And the way to stop it is by allowing people to shed the shame, allowing people to heal. And I said this in my talk, but the only way that we can end this epidemic of abuse is by bringing out this shame and bringing the shame and putting the spotlight on the shame, bringing it out into.
I think that's exactly what the nugget is. At least that's what I got from it. And specifically with that, as a listener, feeling inspired to be a lifeline to other people, just like your soul mama and your new dad were to you. I think, even though our stories are very different, that's where our stories align, is feeling the inspiration to shine light. And we know, Nippy and I know, that so many of the cult survivors that we've talked to are brave. Is such it's not never the right word, but it's like these things exist because people go, oh shit, I was in a cult, or oh dear, I was abused, or whatever. And then they don't talk about it because of the shame.
Shame is the thing that allows it to exist.
Exactly.
If you don't transcend it. If you do it for yourself, transcend your own shame for yourself, the rewards are you get to shine light on the abuses. I think that there's actually a line from The Vow. I think it was the New York Times article guy, Barry Meyer. Sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Yeah. And likewise, darkness is the best growth place for the mold and disease. So,
yeah. So doing a TED, we're doing a TEDx talk is like, let's just put it out there and people can get the idea and learn from it. And that's, I think, it is brave because you have to be so vulnerable to put yourself out in this way. And I commend you for it. And Nippy and I both wish you all the speediest and the best, or not speediest, whatever. You're going to heal whatever way you need to heal. I just hope that you do fully.
Thank you.
And there's no silver bullets.
Well, you're an example for someone else too.
Yeah.
So that's the positive.
I hope
thing.
so. I hope, I tell people my goal is to end child abuse before I leave this earth, leave this planet,
That's a lofty goal, but it's a good goal.
But I think that if nothing, I think that I am in a unique place to make one of the biggest dents in the epidemic of abuse
Yes,
ever.
100%. The more people that tell their stories, the more people recognize they're not alone and the shame is gone and they go, oh, like that. Like I feel like we're kind of coming into that, like it's a new era where people are like, everyone's like on TikTok, oh yeah, I was in a cult. Like it was like, it's people are emerging as like, it's almost, I hate to say trending because that makes it sound awful, but like it's just become more socially acceptable to
and perhaps
share.
It's become safer to share.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
With less shame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what's next for you with this when the TEDx comes? What do you hope? Okay, we already said that you're gonna end child abuse. Amen to that. Sounds good. And you're gonna finish Stanford and
so
see what happens.
In 2025, I'll walk with 2 bachelor's degrees, a degree in psychology and a degree in communications. And in 2026, I said 25, right? 25, I'll walk with those 2 degrees, and then in 26, I'll walk with a master's degree in psychology.
Wow.
So it's mind-blowing to me. Like, I don't even know how I'm doing it.
I don't know either.
I mean, you're living your life without certain shackles now. So you're experiencing that.
My first senior year started yesterday. So first day of school was yesterday.
I love it. We seem to find you in these milestones. We did try this a few months ago. We had technical difficulties, but I'm glad we're doing. And that was your birthday.
It was.
And now we're doing on your
right.
beginning of school. Well, we wish you all the best in your schooling and your TEDx talk and whatever happens next. Most people do TED Talks when they've had some speaking experience, and it was hard for me. And I'm like a performer, so I could only imagine.
I love speaking and I love public speaking. I'm a performer as well, so it comes easily to me. I say that I was born for the stage. I really...
you know what? I actually said the same thing once I was done. I was like, I felt... But leading up to it, I had too much anxiety.
That's fair.
Anyway, we'll have a TEDx coming out party when it's all done.
I love it.
We'll make sure to promote it. Yeah. Launch it together. Congrats, Cameron.
Awesome.
Please keep in touch with us and don't be a stranger and let us know how your life
Cameron.
Unfolds.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and for hearing me and listening and, sending this out to the world.
Thank you, Cameron. Till next time.
Like what you hear, do you? Give us a rating, a review, and subscribe on iTunes. Every little bit helps us get this cult awareness content out there. Smash that subscribe button. You know you want to. Hey everyone, that was Cameron Black, who is also a TEDx speaker, and you can watch his TEDx talk at the link in our show notes.
And also, last time we chatted with him, Ted apparently took his talk off, and we're not totally sure why. Perhaps because those types of things are hard to verify. I also had experience like that when I first did my TEDx. Before it could go on the TED page, they had to have me prove every single point that I was making with additional documentation, which, trust me, was not fun.
No.
From my position, so I cannot imagine that'd be fun for Cameron. That could be another topic, perhaps.
Cult of TEDx? Don't bite the hand that feeds, Sarah.
No, I'm very grateful. But it was challenging. And I wish him all the best in his healing journey. Cameron, you are so brave for speaking up. Thank you for listening, everyone.
And let us know what you think over on social media feeds. And be sure to rate and review this episode. It helps us feed the hungry ghosts of the podcast algorithm. Another cult.
Thank you for listening. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean. I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We're heading over to patreon.com/a-little-bit-culty now to discuss this episode. In the meantime, dear listener, please remember, this podcast is solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. It's not intended as a substitute for real medical, legal, or therapeutic advice. For cult recovery resources and to learn more about seeking safely in this culty world, check out alittlebitculty.com/culty resources and don't miss Sarah's TED Talk called How Cult Literate Are You? Great stuff.
A Little Bit Culty is a Trace 120 production, executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, in collaboration with producer Will Rutherford at Citizens of Sound and our co-creator and show chaplain / bodyguard, Jess Tardy. And our theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant.